You have exactly 10 seconds to remember that code, old man, or I am going to break your daughter's arm." The sound of Julian's voice cracked through my living room like a gunshot. He was not wearing his charming smile anymore. He was not the polite financial consultant who drank my wine and complimented my paintings. He was sweating. His eyes were wide and wild, and his hand was gripping my daughter Sarah's wrist so hard that her skin was turning white.
"Julian, please, you're hurting me."
Sarah cried out, trying to pull away. She looked at me with terrified eyes.
"Dad, please, just tell him. Just tell him whatever he wants to know."
I sat in my leather armchair, my hands resting calmly on my knees. My heart was beating fast, but my face did not move. I watched Julian. I watched the way his pulse was throbbing in his neck. I watched the tremor in his left hand. I told you, Julian," I said, making my voice sound thin and weak. "My memory. It comes and goes. The code. It was Eleanor's birthday? Or maybe our anniversary? I just can't recall."
"Liar!"
Julian screamed. He shoved Sarah onto the sofa. She curled up, sobbing. He marched toward me, looming over my chair. "You are lying to me, Arthur. I know what is in that storage unit. I know you are hiding millions in bearer bonds, and I am not going to let you take that money to the grave while I lose everything." He grabbed the collar of my cardigan and pulled me close. I could smell the stale alcohol on his breath. I could smell the fear coming off him in waves. "Think, Arthur," he hissed. "Think very hard. Because if you don't give me that access code by tomorrow morning, I am going to have Sarah committed. I will tell the doctors she is unstable. I will tell them she is a danger to herself. I have the power of attorney, remember? I control her. I own her. And you will never see her again." He shoved me back into the chair. "Tomorrow morning, Unit 504, or your daughter pays the price." He stormed out of the room, dragging a weeping Sarah with him. The front door slammed, shaking the pictures on the wall. Silence returned to the house. I sat there for a long moment. Slowly, I reached up and straightened my collar. I took a deep breath. Most people would have been shaking. Most people would have been calling the police in a panic. But I am not most people. My name is Arthur Vance. For 40 years, I was the chief structural engineer for Boeing. I built wings that could fly through hurricanes. I designed fuselages that could withstand the crushing pressure of 30,000 feet. I do not panic when the warning lights go on. I analyze the problem, I calculate the variables, and I execute the solution. Julian Thorne thinks he just threatened a helpless, senile old man. He thinks he has the upper hand because he is young and strong and cruel. He has no idea that the bearer bonds in that storage unit do not exist. He has no idea that the memory loss is a lie I have been telling for 6 months. And he certainly has no idea that the moment he threatened my daughter, he didn't just make an enemy. He walked directly into a trap that I have been building piece by piece, just for him. He gave me a deadline of tomorrow morning. That is good. That gives me exactly 12 hours to make sure that when he opens the door to Unit 504, he doesn't find a fortune. He finds his own destruction. But before we get to the morning that changed everything, I need to ask you a favor. I am sharing this story because I want every father and grandfather to know the signs of a predator like Julian. If you believe in protecting your family at all costs, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Help me share this warning with the world. Now, let's go back to where the trouble really started. It wasn't with a threat. It was with a smile. 3 years ago, my daughter Sarah brought Julian home for the first time. I live on Mercer Island, just outside of Seattle. It is a quiet place, full of rain and gray skies. Since my wife Eleanor passed away, this big house has felt like a museum. It is too quiet too empty. So when Sarah said she was bringing someone special to meet me, I was happy. I wanted her to be happy. Sarah is an art curator. She has a soft soul. She sees the best in everyone, just like her mother did. She does not understand that some people are like faulty metal. They look strong on the outside, but inside, they are full of cracks. Julian walked in wearing a three-piece suit that cost more than my first car. He had a firm handshake and perfect teeth. "Mr. Vance," he said, smiling, "it is an honor. Sarah has told me so much about your work at Boeing. A structural engineer, right? Fascinating stuff." "It pays the bills," I said modestly. "Oh, I am sure it did more than that," Julian said, his eyes scanning the room. He wasn't looking at the family photos. He was looking at the expensive paintings. He was looking at the antique furniture. He was looking at the view of the lake. "This is prime real estate, sir. The market on Mercer Island is exploding right now. Have you ever thought about leveraging the equity in this place?" That was the first red flag. Within 5 minutes of entering my home, he was already calculating my net worth. Over dinner, he talked about himself. He was a financial consultant. He used big words like diversification and asset optimization. He told Sarah she was too emotional with her money and that he would help her manage it. I watched him. I stayed quiet. I am an engineer, not a psychologist. I observe. I collect data. And the data was not good. When Sarah spilled a drop of wine on the tablecloth, Julian's eye twitched. For a split second, the charming mask dropped and I saw pure anger. Then just as quickly, the smile returned. "Be careful, darling," he said, his voice sweet but his eyes cold. "We don't want to ruin your father's nice things, do we?" Sarah shrank back. "Sorry," she whispered. I felt a tightness in my chest. It was the same feeling I used to get when I saw a microscopic crack in a wing strut. It was a sign of failure waiting to happen. 6 months later, they were married. I paid for the wedding. Julian insisted on the most expensive venue in Seattle. He invited people I didn't know, business partners, potential clients. He used my daughter's wedding as a networking event. After the wedding, things changed fast. Julian started isolating Sarah. He told her her friends were jealous of his success. He told her she didn't need to work because he would take care of everything. And then he started working on me. He would come over and sigh about how expensive healthcare was getting. He would leave brochures for luxury nursing homes on my coffee table. "Arthur," he would say, "you are getting older. Living alone here, it is dangerous. What if you fall? What if you forget the stove is on?" He was gaslighting me. He was trying to make me doubt my own mind. And that's when I decided to play along. I decided to give him exactly what he wanted, a confused, helpless old man with a secret fortune. I called my lawyer, Stan. We met in a park away from phones and cameras. "Stan," I said, "I need you to spread a rumor." "What kind of rumor, Arthur?" "I want people to think I am losing my marbles," I said. "And I want people to think I have a stash of unregistered bearer bonds from the 80s locked away in a storage unit." Stan looked at me like I was crazy. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because," I said, watching a crow fly across the gray Seattle sky, "I need to catch a rat. And to catch a rat, you need really good cheese." I started the act the next week. I would forget my wallet at dinner. I would call Sarah and ask her the same question 3 times. I watched Julian's eyes light up. He thought his plan was working. He thought I was crumbling. He had no idea that every time I forgot something, I was writing it down in my journal. Every time he insulted Sarah, I was recording it on the hidden microphones I had installed in the antique clock I gave them as a wedding gift. I was building a case. I was building a trap. But I didn't know how desperate Julian really was until my friend Frank, a retired private investigator, handed me a file 3 days ago. "He is broke, Arthur," Frank said. He owes $500,000 to a loan shark in the city, crypto gambling. He is not investing Sarah's money. He is stealing it to pay off his debts. And the sharks gave him a deadline. That explained the violence today. That explained the threat to break Sarah's arm. Julian was out of time. He needed my millions to save his own life. Now, sitting in my silent house, I looked at the clock. It was 3 a.m. I had 6 hours left before Julian came back. I stood up and walked to the window. The rain had stopped. "You want the code, Julian?" I whispered. "I'll give you the code." I picked up my phone and dialed a number. "Frank," I said when he answered. "It is time. Initiate Protocol Omega." "Are you sure, Arthur?" Frank asked. "Once we do this, there is no going back." "I know," I said. "He threatened Sarah. There is no going back for him either." I hung up the phone. I put on my raincoat. I grabbed my cane, not because I needed it, but because it was part of the costume. I was going to the storage unit. But I wasn't going there to get money. I was going there to finish this. To understand why I set a trap for my own son-in-law, you have to understand what he took from me first. He did not start by trying to steal my money. That came later. First, he stole my dignity. And then, he stole my daughter's trust. It started about a year into their marriage. I went over to their condo for Sunday brunch. It was a nice place, modern and cold with too much glass and not enough wood. I remember that day clearly. I had just parked my car. I walked into the kitchen and put my car keys on the granite counter, right next to the fruit bowl. I am an engineer. I am precise. I know exactly where I place my tools. I went to the bathroom to wash my hands. When I came back, Sarah was setting the table and Julian was pouring coffee. "Ready to go, Dad?" Sarah asked after we finished eating. "Sure," I said. I reached for my keys next to the fruit bowl. They were not there. I frowned. I patted my pockets. I looked under the napkins. "What's wrong, Arthur?" Julian asked. He was leaning against the fridge, sipping his coffee, watching me with that flat, shark-like stare. "My keys," I said. "I put them right here." Julian chuckled softly. "Are you sure? Maybe you left them in your coat?" "No," I said firmly. "I put them next to the fruit bowl." "Dad," Sarah said gently, "maybe you just forgot?" We spent 10 minutes looking. I started to feel foolish. I started to sweat. A man who built airplanes should not lose his car keys. Finally, Julian opened the freezer to get some ice. He pulled out my keys from inside the ice bin. "Arthur," he said, his voice loud enough for Sarah to hear perfectly. "Why are your keys in the freezer?" I stared at him. I didn't put them there. Julian sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh. He walked over and handed them to me, patting my shoulder like I was a toddler. "It's okay, Arthur, it happens. My grandmother used to do things like this right before she, well, you know." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. He looked at Sarah, and I saw the fear in her eyes. She wasn't looking at me with respect anymore. She was looking at me with pity. She was wondering if her father was losing his mind. I knew I hadn't put those keys in the freezer. I knew Julian had moved them while I was in the bathroom. But how could I prove it? If I accused him, I would look paranoid. I would look exactly like a crazy old man. So I swallowed my anger. "Must have been a mistake," I muttered. That was the beginning. Over the next few months, Julian escalated his campaign. He called it optimizing our lives, but I called it erasing my daughter. Sarah is an art curator. She is brilliant. She discovers beauty that other people miss, but she has never been confident with numbers. Julian used that against her. One evening, I was at their house for dinner again. Sarah was excited. She wanted to buy a small painting from a new artist she had discovered. It was not expensive, maybe $500. It is an investment, Julian, she said, her eyes shining. This artist is going to be huge. Julian didn't look up from his tablet. We don't have the liquidity for that right now, Sarah. But I checked the account, she said. We have the money. Julian laughed. It was a cruel, short sound. Honey, checking the balance doesn't mean you understand the exposure. We are leveraged on the crypto positions. If the market corrects, we need that cash for the margin call. You don't understand how these things work. Leave the math to the adults, okay? Sarah stopped smiling. She shrank into her chair. Okay, she whispered. I'm sorry. I gripped my fork so hard my knuckles turned white. Sarah, I said, if you want the painting, I will buy it for you. Julian's head snapped up. No, he said sharply. We don't need your charity, Arthur. And besides, Sarah needs to learn discipline. She spends money like a child. She earns her own money, I said, my voice rising. And I manage it, Julian shot back. Then he lowered his voice, putting on that fake mask of concern again. Arthur, why are you getting so aggressive? Is this another episode? Sarah, did you see how his hands were shaking? Agitation is a common symptom. He did it so smoothly. He turned my defense of my daughter into a symptom of my dementia. Sarah looked at me terrified. Dad, please, calm down. Julian is just trying to help. I looked at my daughter. The strong, independent woman I had raised was disappearing. In her place was a frightened girl who had to ask permission to spend her own money, who believed her husband was a genius and her father was senile. I drove home that night in the rain, crying. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I cried because I felt helpless. I cried because I knew that if I tried to tell Sarah the truth, that her husband was a manipulative monster, she would just think it was my sickness talking. Julian had built a wall between us. He had built it with big words and fake keys in the freezer. But Julian made a mistake. He forgot that I am an engineer. When an engineer sees a wall, he doesn't just bang his head against it. He looks for the foundation. He looks for the cracks. He finds out what holds the wall up, and then he figures out how to bring it down. I wiped my tears. I sat at my desk. I opened my laptop. You want to play games, Julian? I whispered. Okay. Let's see who plays better. I didn't investigate his personality. I investigated his numbers. Julian claimed to be a financial wizard. He claimed to be rich. He claimed to be leveraged in crypto. I called Frank, my old friend who used to be a detective. Frank, I said, I need you to dig. I need you to find out where Julian Thorne really gets his money. It took Frank 2 weeks. When he came to my house with a manila envelope, he didn't want to drink the coffee I offered. He looked nervous. Arthur, he said, you think Julian is just a jerk who bullies your daughter. It is worse than that. Much worse. Tell me, I said. Frank opened the file. He isn't a consultant. He is a gambler. And he is losing. Badly. That was the moment everything changed. That was the moment I stopped being a victim and started being a hunter. I sat at my mahogany desk staring at the photos Frank had spread out in front of me. Outside, the Seattle rain was hitting the window pane, sounding like nervous fingers tapping against the glass. Are you sure about this, Frank? I asked. My voice was steady, but my stomach felt like it was tied in knots. I wish I wasn't, Frank said. He took a sip of his cold coffee. I followed him for 3 nights, Arthur. He didn't go to any client meetings. He didn't go to any office. Frank pointed a thick finger at a grainy photograph. It showed Julian standing in a dark alley behind a club in Pioneer Square. He was talking to a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. The man was holding Julian by the lapels of his expensive suit. That guy, Frank said, is named Sergey. He doesn't work for a bank. He works for an organization that breaks knees when people don't pay. I looked closer at the photo. Julian looked terrified. It was the same look I had seen earlier that day when he couldn't find his car keys. It was the look of a man who was drowning. The crypto market crashed last month, Frank explained. Julian was leveraged to the hilt. He bet everything, not just his money, Arthur. He bet Sarah's savings. He bet the equity in their condo. And he lost it all. I felt a cold rage spreading through my chest. It wasn't just that he was stealing. It was that he had gambled away my daughter's safety. How much? I asked. $500,000, Frank said, and the interest is adding up every day. Sergei gave him a deadline. If he doesn't pay by the end of the month, they are going to come for his assets. And since everything is in Sarah's name too. Frank didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. If the loan sharks came for Julian, my daughter would be in the crossfire. I have to tell her, I said, standing up. I have to show her these photos. I have to get her out of that house tonight. Sit down, Arthur, Frank said sharply. I looked at him. My daughter is in danger. If you go to Sarah right now with these photos, what will she do? Frank asked. She loves him, or she thinks she does. He has spent 3 years brainwashing her. He will tell her the photos are fake. He will tell her you hired a PI to stalk him because you are a paranoid, jealous old man. He will use this to cut you off completely. I slowly sat back down. Frank was right. Julian had built a fortress of lies around my daughter. If I attacked it directly, I would only make the walls thicker. And there is another problem, Frank added. If Julian knows we know, he might panic. A desperate man does desperate things. If he thinks he can't get the money from you legally, he might try to take it by force. He might hurt Sarah to make you pay. I closed my eyes. I thought about the structural integrity of a bridge. When a bridge is failing, you don't just smash it with a hammer. You have to reinforce it carefully before you can repair it. So I can't tell her, I said quietly. And I can't call the police yet because he hasn't physically hurt her. Yet. Exactly, Frank said. We need him to make a move. We need him to do something undeniable. Something that proves to Sarah and the police that he is a criminal. I looked at the photos of Julian begging for his life in the alley. I looked at his expensive suit and his terrified eyes. He needs money, I said, thinking aloud. He needs liquid assets, fast, untraceable. That's why he wants you to sell the house, Frank said. No, I said, a plan forming in my mind. The house takes too long to sell. There are inspections, taxes, paperwork. He doesn't have time for that. Sergei wants his money now. I remembered the lie I had told my lawyer about the bearer bonds in my storage unit. I remembered the greedy look in Julian's eyes when I mentioned them. He thinks I have millions of dollars in paper bonds sitting in a box downtown, I said. He thinks I am a confused old man who barely remembers the code. I looked at Frank. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. What do you mean? I'm going to play the part, Frank. I am going to become the senile, helpless old man he thinks I am. I am going to make him think the door is open. I'm going to make him think he can just walk in and take it. You're going to use yourself as bait, Frank said. It wasn't a question. I am going to use his own greed against him, I replied. He thinks he is a shark. He is about to find out he is just a minnow. That night I started my performance. I called Sarah at 2 a.m. When she answered, her voice was groggy and worried. Dad, is everything okay? Eleanor? I asked, making my voice sound confused and distant. Eleanor, is that you? I can't find the blue folder, the one with the bonds. Did we put it in the storage unit? Dad, Sarah said, her voice trembling. Mom died 4 years ago. This is Sarah. Oh, I said, pausing for a long time. Oh, Sarah, right. I'm sorry, sweetheart. I got confused. I was looking for the bonds for the safe deposit. I heard movement on the other end of the line. I heard a male voice whispering. Julian was listening. "Dad," Sarah said, and I could hear Julian coaching her in the background.
Dad, Julian says maybe he should help you organize that storage unit, just to make sure everything is safe, since you are having trouble remembering.
"Maybe," I whispered. "Maybe that's a good idea. I feel very tired, Sarah. Very confused."
We'll come over tomorrow,
Sarah said. "We'll help you." I hung up the phone. My hand was steady, my mind was sharp. I wasn't confused. I was calculating the load-bearing capacity of a lie. And I knew that by tomorrow, Julian would be so hungry for those imaginary bonds that he would make a mistake. He was going to step right into the trap. And I would be waiting. In engineering, we have a rule. You cannot fix a structural failure until you understand the load path. You have to know exactly where the pressure is coming from. You have to watch the cracks grow. You have to wait until the failure point is visible before you can reinforce it. Waiting is the hardest part. For the last 3 months, I have been living a double life. To the world and to my son-in-law Julian, I am Arthur Vance, the retired old man who forgets his keys and tells rambling stories about the old days. But at night, inside my study, I am something else entirely. I am a listener. When Sarah and Julian got married, I gave them a wedding present. It was a beautiful, handcrafted grandfather clock. It was made of mahogany with a brass pendulum that swung back and forth with a steady, rhythmic beat. It stands in their hallway, right between the kitchen and the living room. Sarah loved it because it was an heirloom. Julian loved it because he thought it was expensive. Neither of them knew that behind the clock face, tucked inside the hollow wood of the casing, I had installed a high-fidelity listening device. It has a battery life of 6 months. It activates by voice, and it transmits directly to a secure server in my basement. Some people might call this an invasion of privacy. I call it perimeter defense. Every night at 9 p.m., I sit at my desk. I put on my headphones, and I listen to the life my daughter is actually living. It breaks my heart every single time. I hear the way Julian talks to her when no one else is around. In public, he calls her honey and sweetheart. But in the privacy of their home, the mask comes off. "You spent $50 at the grocery store?" I heard him shout last Tuesday. "$50, Sarah? Do you think money grows on trees? Do you think I am made of cash?" "We needed food, Julian." Sarah's voice was small, trembling. "We were out of milk and eggs." "You are wasteful," Julian spat back. "Just like your father. You think you are entitled to everything. I'm out here busting my back trying to save us from financial ruin, and you are buying premium eggs?" I gripped the edge of my desk. I wanted to scream. I wanted to drive over there and tear the front door off its hinges. My daughter, who works 60 hours a week at the gallery, was being screamed at for buying eggs. But I didn't move. I didn't drive over. Instead, I opened my leather journal. May 14th, 7:42 p.m., I wrote. Subject: financial abuse. Julian berates Sarah for basic household expenses. Gaslighting tactic. Blaming her for his gambling losses. I wrote it down in black ink. It was not just a diary entry. It was evidence. I have filled 3 notebooks. I have recorded dates, times, and direct quotes. I have recorded the lies he tells her about me. "Your dad called again today," Julian lied one evening. "He was rambling, Sarah. He didn't make any sense. I think he's getting worse. We really need to get that power of attorney signed. If we don't control his assets soon, he is going to lose everything." "I don't want to take his rights away, Julian," Sarah said, crying. "It is not taking his rights away," Julian yelled. "It is protecting him. Why are you so selfish? Why don't you care about our future?" I listened to my daughter cry herself to sleep that night. I listened to the silence of that house, a silence that was heavy with fear. It takes a lot of discipline to sit in a dark room and listen to your child suffer. It takes every ounce of strength I have not to intervene too soon. But I know that if I act now, if I just storm in there and shout, Julian will twist it. He will say I am paranoid. He will say I am spying. He will use it to cut me off from Sarah forever. I need something bigger. I need something undeniable. And then, yesterday, I got it. I was listening to the feed from the clock. Julian was on the phone. He wasn't talking to Sarah. He was talking to someone else. His voice was hushed, frantic. I know, Sergey. I know the deadline is Friday, Julian whispered. I have the solution. The old man has bonds, bearer bonds, millions. They are in a storage unit downtown. Pause. Yes, I can get access. He is senile, Sergey. He barely knows what day it is. I am taking him there tomorrow. I will get the code, I will get the bonds, and I will pay you everything with interest. Pause. No, don't touch the wife. Leave Sarah out of this. I said I will handle it. I took off my headphones. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from adrenaline. This was it. The confession. He admitted to the gambling debt. He admitted to the plan to steal my assets. And most importantly, he admitted that he was doing it all to pay off a criminal organization. I saved the audio file. I made 3 copies, one on my laptop, one on a flash drive, and one sent to Frank's secure email. The trap was set. The bait had been taken. Julian was coming for the bonds. My phone rang. It was Sarah. Dad, she said. Her voice sounded tired. Julian and we're coming over tomorrow morning. Julian wants to take you to breakfast, and then maybe we can go look at that storage unit, just to make sure everything is safe? I closed my eyes. I could hear Julian breathing in the background. That sounds nice, sweetheart, I said, putting on my old shaky voice. I would like that. I think I remember where the unit is. I think I can find the key. Okay, Dad, she said. We'll be there at 9 a.m. I hung up. I looked at the journal on my desk. I looked at the file labeled Julian Thorne, Criminal Intent. I stood up and walked to the window. The sun was starting to rise over Lake Washington. It was going to be a clear day. A good day for flying. A good day for crashing. Come on over, Julian, I whispered. Come and see what the old man has in store for you. I wasn't just a father anymore. I was the architect of his downfall. And tomorrow, the walls were going to close in. At 9 a.m. sharp, Julian's black electric SUV pulled into my driveway. It moved silently, like a shark gliding through dark water. Rain was falling in sheets against the windshield. I stood by the window adjusting my glasses. I was wearing my old cardigan, the one with the coffee stain on the sleeve. I needed to look frail. I needed to look like a man who had given up. When the doorbell rang, I waited 10 seconds before answering. I wanted Julian to be impatient. I wanted his heart rate to be up. I opened the door. Dad, Sarah said. She looked tired. There were dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't hide. She stepped forward to hug me, but Julian put a hand on her shoulder, stopping her. Let's get inside, Sarah, he said. It's wet out here. He walked past me without shaking my hand. He marched into the living room and looked around, scanning for something. Maybe he expected to see packed bags. Maybe he expected to see the money sitting on the table. Good morning, Julian, I said, my voice shaking just enough to be convincing. Thank you for coming. I had a bad night. My head is all foggy. Julian turned to me, a fake smile plastered onto his face. It was terrifying how quickly he could switch it on. Don't worry, Arthur, he said. We are here to help. Sarah said you wanted to go to the storage unit to check on those papers? He didn't say bonds. He was too careful for that, but his eyes were hungry. Yes, I said. I found the inventory list last night. I think there are things in there that I shouldn't have kept. Things that are worth a lot of money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a fake inventory list I had typed up on my typewriter the night before. It looked old. It smelled old. I handed it to him. Julian snatched it from my hand. His eyes darted down the page. I watched his pupils dilate. Item 4. Series EE Savings Bonds, 1985. Item 7. Bearer Bonds, unregistered. Boeing Pension Allocation. Item 12. Patent Prototypes, blueprints. He looked up at me, and for a second he forgot to breathe. He was doing the math. In his head, that piece of paper was worth millions. In his head, that piece of paper was his ticket out of debt. It was his freedom from the loan sharks. Arthur, he said, his voice trembling with excitement. This is incredible. We need to secure this immediately. We need to go to Iron Mountain right now. Yes, I said slowly. I suppose you are right. I took a step toward the coat rack, then stopped. I grabbed the back of the sofa. I let my knees buckle just a little. I let out a low groan.
Dad?
Sarah rushed to my side.
Dad, are you okay?
I feel dizzy, I whispered. My chest, it feels tight. Sit down, Arthur, Julian said. He didn't sound concerned. He sounded annoyed. Just sit for a minute. Drink some water. We have to go. I don't think I can drive, I said, sinking into the armchair. I don't think I can go out in this rain. I need to rest. Maybe we can go tomorrow? Julian's face went red. He looked at the inventory list in his hand, then at me. We can't wait until tomorrow, he snapped. Sarah looked at him shocked. Julian, he's not feeling well. Look at him. Julian took a deep breath. He realized he had broken character. He forced his face to relax, but his hands were balled into fists. I am sorry, he said through gritted teeth. I am worried about the security, Sarah. With a list like this, anyone could try to steal it. The longer we wait, the more dangerous it is. He turned to me. He knelt down, bringing his face close to mine. Arthur, he said softly, you don't have to go. Just give me the keycard and the code. Sarah and I can go. We will bring everything here. We will do the heavy lifting. This was the test. I looked at Sarah. She was biting her lip. She looked at Julian, then at me. She was torn. Her husband was telling her it was an emergency. Her father was telling her he was sick. I can't, I said. The facility, they need my fingerprint. I have to be there personally, or... I paused. I looked Julian dead in the eye. Or I need to sign a power of attorney form granting you access. The room went silent. This was what Julian had wanted for 3 years. Total control, legal access to everything. Yes, Julian whispered. That makes sense. We can print the form right now. I have a template on my phone. We can sign it, get it notarized, and I can handle everything for you. You can rest. I looked at Sarah. Sarah, what do you think? Sarah looked at her shoes. She looked small. Maybe it's best, Dad. Julian is good with these things, and you are getting tired. My heart broke. There it was, the betrayal. She wasn't doing it to hurt me. She was doing it because she had been conditioned to believe I was weak and he was strong. She had been brainwashed. But I needed to hear her say it. I needed to know exactly how deep the hooks were. Okay, I said. Okay, if that is what you think is best. Julian stood up. He looked triumphant. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "I will go to the car," he said. "I have a mobile printer in the trunk. I'll get the papers." He practically ran out the front door. As soon as he was gone, the room was quiet. Just the sound of the rain and the ticking of the clock that was recording everything. Sarah sat on the arm of my chair. She took my hand. Her hand was cold. "I'm sorry, Dad," she whispered. "I know you like to be independent. But Julian is under a lot of stress. He just wants to fix everything." "I know, sweetheart," I said. "I know." I squeezed her hand. I wasn't angry at her. I was angry at the thief who had stolen her courage. Julian came back in 5 minutes later, soaking wet, holding a stack of papers. "Here," he said, thrusting a pen at me. "Sign here, and here, and here." I put on my reading glasses. I took the pen. I looked at the document. General power of attorney. It would give him the right to sell my house, empty my bank accounts, and access my storage unit. My hand hovered over the paper. "Arthur," Julian said, his voice tight. "Sign it." I touched the pen to the paper. Then, I let the pen slip from my fingers. It clattered onto the floor. I can't," I said. "My hand. It's too shaky. I can't write." Julian let out a roar of frustration. "Pick it up. Just make an X. It doesn't have to be perfect. Julian!" Sarah stood up. "Stop it. You are scaring him." Julian spun around to face her. "Shut up, Sarah. You don't understand. We need this." "No," Sarah said, stepping between him and me. "He is not signing anything today. Look at him. He is having an episode. We are leaving." Julian stared at her. For a second, I thought he was going to hit her. His eyes were black holes. But then he remembered where he was. He remembered the bonds. He remembered that he needed her cooperation at least for a little while longer. "Fine," he spat. "Fine. We will come back tomorrow, when he is better." He grabbed his papers and stormed out. Sarah bent down and kissed my forehead. "Rest, Dad. I'll call you later." She followed him out. I watched them drive away. I didn't sign the papers. I never intended to sign the papers. I just needed to see how desperate he was. And now I knew. He was desperate enough to scream at his wife. He was desperate enough to force a sick old man to sign legal documents. He was desperate enough to break in. I walked to my desk. I picked up the phone and called Frank. "He took the bait," I said. "He thinks there are millions in there, and he knows he can't get me to sign the papers legally." "So what does that mean?" Frank asked. "It means he is going to try to rob me," I said, "tonight." "Are you ready?" "I built the lock," I said. "I know exactly how to trap the thief." Tonight, Julian Thorne was going to learn a lesson about structural engineering. The harder you push against a reinforced door, the more it hurts when it doesn't open. The hardest part of my job at Boeing wasn't designing the planes. It was the crash testing. You spend years building something beautiful, something strong, and then you have to watch it get destroyed just to prove it can survive. That night, sitting in my study with my headphones on, I felt like I was watching a crash test. But this time, the crash dummy was my daughter. It was 7 p.m. The rain was still hammering against the roof. Through the hidden microphone in the grandfather clock, the audio feed from Sarah's house was crystal clear. They had just gotten home. I heard the front door slam so hard the microphone clipped with static. "You ruined it!" Julian screamed. "You ruined everything!" "I didn't do anything!" Sarah's voice was shaking. "He was sick, Julian. My father was having a heart episode. Why do you only care about the papers?" "Because the papers are the only thing standing between us and a bullet in the head," Julian roared. I heard the sound of glass shattering. He must have thrown a vase or a glass against the wall. I flinched, my hand hovering over the volume dial, but I didn't turn it down. I needed to hear every second. "What are you talking about?" Sarah cried. "What bullet?
Julian, you are scaring me. What is going on?
I owe money, Sarah, Julian yelled. The mask was completely off now. I owe $500,000 to people who don't file lawsuits. They break legs. And if I don't pay them by tomorrow morning, they aren't just coming for me. They're coming for you. There was a silence on the line. A heavy, terrifying silence. You gambled it? Sarah whispered. Our savings? The money for the gallery? You lost it all? I didn't lose it. Julian sounded desperate, manic. I invested it. The market was rigged. It wasn't my fault. It's never my fault. This is the mind of a narcissist. Even when they are drowning, they blame the water. I need to leave, Sarah said. Her voice was quiet but firm. I'm going to my dad's house. No, Julian said. His voice dropped to a low, dangerous growl. You are not going anywhere. Get out of my way, Julian. I said no. Then I heard it. The sound of a scuffle, the sound of fabric tearing, and then a sharp gasp from Sarah, followed by the thud of a body hitting the floor. Stay down, Julian screamed. You stay right there. You don't leave this house until I say so. My heart stopped. I stood up, knocking my chair over. My hands were trembling with a rage I hadn't felt in 40 years. He had touched her. He had put his hands on my daughter. I grabbed my phone. My thumb hovered over the emergency dial. I wanted to call the police. I wanted to send a SWAT team to his door, but I stopped. If I called the police now, it would be a domestic dispute. It would be he said, she said. Julian would charm the officers. He would say Sarah was hysterical. He would say she fell. Without video proof inside their house, he might talk his way out of it, and then he would take her somewhere I couldn't find her. I needed him caught in the act of a felony. I needed him to be undeniable. I put the headphones back on. Julian was pacing. I could hear his heavy breathing. He was muttering to himself. I can't wait, he whispered. The old man won't sign. I can't wait for the legal way. I heard the sound of a zipper, a bag being opened, tools clinking together. I have the scanner, Julian muttered. I have his fingerprint from the glass he drank from. I have the signature from the birthday card. I can bypass the biometric lock. I can forge the authorization. He was talking about breaking into Iron Mountain. He wasn't going to ask for the money anymore. He was going to steal it. He was going to use his tech skills, the forgery tools he used to fake bank statements, to crack the vault. I'll get the bonds tonight, Julian said to the empty room. I'll pay Sergei. Then I'll come back, and we will deal with your father, Sarah. We will put him in a home where he can rot. I heard footsteps walking away. I heard the garage door open and close. He was gone. He left Sarah crying on the floor, and he was heading to the storage unit. I took a deep breath. The crash test was over. Now it was time for the cleanup crew. I called Frank. He is moving, I said. He assaulted Sarah. He is heading to Iron Mountain with burglary tools. He's going to try to hack the lock. I'm on it, Frank said. I'm calling Detective Miller. We will be waiting for him. No, I said, not yet. Let him get inside. Let him break the lock. Let him think he has won. Why, Arthur? Because I want to see his face, I said coldly. I want to be there when he opens that door and realizes his life is over. I hung up the phone. I walked to the closet and put on my coat. I grabbed my car keys. I wasn't the frail old man anymore. I wasn't the confused father. I was the engineer who had built a perfect cage, and the rat was running straight into it. I drove into the rain, heading downtown. I wasn't going to save my money. I was going to save my daughter. The Iron Mountain storage facility in downtown Seattle looks like a bank fortress built inside a bomb shelter. It is concrete, steel, and cold. It is a place designed to keep secrets safe forever. At 10:30 p.m., the rain was coming down so hard it looked like white noise on a television screen. I sat in my car across the street, the engine off, the heater running low. On my lap, I had a tablet connected to the facility's security system. I watched the screen. A black figure moved through the rain toward the side entrance. It was Julian. He wasn't wearing his expensive suit anymore. He was wearing a dark hoodie and black gloves. He carried a heavy duffel bag over his shoulder. He looked like a burglar, but he walked with the arrogance of a man who thought he owned the world. "He is at the perimeter," I said into my headset. "I see him," Frank replied. Frank was parked 2 blocks away, ready to move if things went wrong. "Do you want me to intercept?" "No," I said. "Let him enter. I want him to commit the crime. I want the cameras to record every single second of it." I watched on the screen as Julian approached the keypad at the side door. He pulled a small device from his pocket. It was a signal cloner. He must have bought it on the dark web or from his criminal friends. He held it up to the reader. A few seconds passed. Then the light on the keypad turned green. The heavy steel door clicked open. "He is in," I whispered. My heart was beating fast, but my hands were steady. I felt a strange mix of anger and satisfaction. Julian was proving me right. He wasn't just a bad husband. He was a criminal. He was willing to break into a secure facility to steal money that didn't belong to him. I switched the camera feed to the interior hallway. Julian was walking fast. He was sweating. He kept looking over his shoulder. He was nervous. Good. Nervous men make mistakes. He reached the elevator and used the cloned signal again. He pressed the button for the 5th floor. I tapped my screen and switched to the camera outside Unit 504. This was the kill zone. The elevator doors opened. Julian stepped out. He walked down the long concrete hallway. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. He stopped in front of Unit 504. He stared at the steel door. To him, it looked like the gate to paradise. He thought behind that door lay millions of dollars in bonds. He thought it was his salvation. He dropped his bag and unzipped it. He pulled out a high-tech drill and a decoder pad. "He is not using the key," I noted. "He's trying to bypass the lock." "That is a felony," Frank said in my ear. "Possession of burglary tools, attempted grand larceny. We have him, Arthur." "Not yet," I said. "Wait until he drills." On the screen, Julian attached the decoder to the electronic lock. He typed in a sequence of numbers. The lock beeped red. Access denied. He tried again. Red light. He tried a 3rd time. Red light. I saw him slam his fist against the door. I could see him shouting, though there was no audio on this camera. He was panicking. The loan sharks gave him until tomorrow morning. He was running out of time. He picked up the drill. He aimed it at the core of the lock. "There it is," I said. "He is drilling." As the drill bit touched the metal, I tapped a command on my tablet. "Initiate lockdown." Instantly, the lights in the hallway turned red. A silent alarm triggered at the police station, though Julian didn't know that yet. But in the facility, a loud recorded voice began to announce, "Security breach detected. Sector 5 lockdown initiated. Authorities have been notified." Julian jumped back like he had been burned. He dropped the drill. He looked around wildly. The heavy fire doors at the end of the hallway began to close automatically. He was trapped. Or so I thought. The Julian was fueled by pure desperation. He didn't surrender. He didn't freeze. He grabbed his bag and ran toward the fire doors before they could fully seal. He squeezed through the gap just in time. "He is running," I told Frank. "He is heading for the stairs." "I'll cut him off at the exit," Frank said. "No!" I shouted. A sudden realization hit me like a cold wave. I watched Julian on the stairwell camera. He wasn't running aimlessly. He was furious. He was screaming into his phone. "It didn't work!" I heard him yell through the audio sensor in the stairwell. "The code didn't work! The old man played me!" He paused, listening to someone on the other end. Probably Sergey. "No, I can still get it," Julian screamed. "I know where the key is! I know who has the real code!" My blood ran cold. "Sarah," I whispered. Julian wasn't running away to hide. He was running back to the source. He realized that hacking wouldn't work. He realized that stealing wouldn't work. He needed the one person who he thought could open the door for him. He was going back for my daughter. "Frank," I yelled into the headset. "He is not fleeing the scene. He is going back to Sarah. He is going to use her as leverage." "I'm moving," Frank said. "I'm blocking his car." "No time," I said. I saw Julian burst out of the side door on the street level. He was sprinting toward his SUV. He looked insane. His eyes were wide, his face twisted in a mask of rage. He jumped into his car and peeled away from the curb, running a red light. "He is going to the house," I said, throwing my car into gear. "He is going to take her hostage." "Arthur, wait for the police!" Frank yelled. "The police are 5 minutes away!" I shouted back. "He will be at the house in 10. I have to get there first. I have to save her." I slammed on the gas pedal. My old sedan roared to life. I am a careful driver. I obey speed limits, but tonight I drove like I was testing an engine at maximum thrust. The rain blurred the world outside. All I could see was Julian's taillights in the distance. All I could think about was Sarah, alone in that house, waiting for a monster who had nothing left to lose. I had set a trap to catch a thief, but I had made a terrible miscalculation. I had cornered a rat, and now the rat was going to attack the only thing that mattered to me. I gripped the steering wheel. "Hold on, Sarah," I whispered. "Dad is coming." I was driving 80 miles an hour on the highway, ignoring the rain that tried to push my car off the road. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt, but my mind was already at Sarah's house. I was too late. I knew I was too late when I saw the flashing lights of the security system on my phone app turn red. The front door of Sarah's condo had been breached. Julian hadn't used his key. He had kicked the door in. Inside the condo, the nightmare was unfolding. I know this because the microphones were still recording. I listened to the horror play out through the speakers of my car as I drove. "Get up!" Julian screamed. I heard the sound of footsteps pounding up the stairs. I heard the bedroom door slam open. "Julian?" Sarah's voice was thick with sleep and terror. "What are you doing? You're soaking wet." "Where is the backup code?" Julian yelled. "Don't lie to me, Sarah. Your father is a senile old fool, but he wouldn't trust his memory alone. He gave you a backup code. Where is it?" "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah cried. "He never gave me a code." "Liar!" I heard a crash. He had flipped the bedside table. "I tried the hack," Julian shouted, his voice cracking. "It didn't work. The alarm went off. The police are coming." "I have 10 minutes, Sarah. 10 minutes before my life is over. Give me the code or I swear to God." "Julian, please." Sarah was sobbing now. "You need help. We can call the police. We can explain." "The police can't help me." Julian laughed, a wild, broken sound.
Sergei doesn't care about the police. He wants his money, and if I don't give it to him, I am a dead man, and I am not going down alone. Then, the sound that stopped my heart. The distinct metallic click of a handgun slide being pulled back. "Julian?" Sarah whispered. Is that a gun?" "It's insurance," Julian said coldly. "Get dressed. We are going to the warehouse. You are going to open that door for me." "I can't," she cried. "I don't know the code." "Then you better pray your father answers his phone." My phone rang. It was Sarah's number. I answered it immediately. "Julian." "You played me, old man," Julian screamed into the phone. "You set off the alarm. You tried to trap me." "I tried to stop you from committing a felony," I said, forcing my voice to remain calm. "It is over, Julian. The police are on their way to the warehouse. Go home." "I am home," Julian yelled. "And guess who is with me?
Say hello to your dad, Sarah. Dad! Sarah screamed. He has a gun! He has a gun! Her voice broke into a sob that tore through me like a jagged piece of metal. Listen to me closely, Arthur, Julian said. His voice dropped to a low, deadly hiss. I am putting Sarah in the car. We are driving to Iron Mountain. You are going to meet us there, and you are going open that unit. Julian, don't do this, I said. The police. I don't care about the police, he interrupted. If I see a single cop car, if I see a single blue light, I will hurt her. Do you understand? I have nothing left to lose. If I go down, she goes down with me. Okay, I said quickly. Okay, I understand. No police, just me. You have 20 minutes, Julian said. If you are late, she pays the price. The line went dead. I threw the phone onto the passenger seat. I pressed the accelerator to the floor. The engine roared. My plan had failed. I had wanted to catch a thief, but I had created a hostage situation. I had underestimated his desperation. I had assumed he was a coward who would run when the alarm went off. I forgot that a coward with a gun is the most dangerous thing in the world. I needed help, but I couldn't call the police. If they showed up with sirens blaring, Julian might panic and pull the trigger. I grabbed my phone again and dialed Frank. Frank, I said, execute Protocol Omega. Arthur. Frank's voice was tense. He has a gun. I heard the feed. We need SWAT. No SWAT, I said.
He said if he sees blue lights, he kills her. He means it, Frank. He is out of his mind.
So what are we doing? I'm going to the warehouse, I said. I am going to let him in. Arthur, you can't, Frank said. Once he realizes there's no money inside, he will snap. He will kill you both. I know, I said. That is why I need you to be inside before we get there. Inside? Use the service entrance, I instructed. You have the override key I gave you. Get into the security room, disable the hallway cameras so he doesn't see you on the monitors. And Frank, bring your piece. There was a pause. Frank was a professional. He knew what I was asking. I was asking him to prepare for a shootout. I'll be there in 10, Frank said. Don't die on me, Arthur. I don't plan to, I said. I hung up and focused on the road. The rain was easing up, but the streets were slick and black. I thought about Sarah. I thought about the little girl who used to hold the flashlight for me while I fixed the car. I thought about the woman who trusted a man who was now holding a gun to her head. She was seeing the truth now. It was a brutal, violent way to learn, but the illusion was gone. She knew who Julian was. Now, I just had to make sure she survived the lesson. I pulled up to the Iron Mountain facility. It looked like a tomb in the darkness. I parked my car in the middle of the lot under the only working street lamp. I wanted Julian to see me. I wanted him to focus on me. I got out of the car. I didn't take my cane this time. I stood straight. I buttoned my coat. 5 minutes later, Julian's black SUV screeched into the lot. He parked 10 feet away from me. The door opened. Julian stepped out. He was holding Sarah by the arm, dragging her. In his other hand, the gun was pointed at her ribs. Sarah looked broken. Her face was pale, her hair wet and matted. When she saw me, she let out a small whimper. Dad. I'm here, Sarah, I said calmly. It's going to be okay. Open it! Julian shouted. He was shivering, his eyes darting around the empty lot. Open the main door! I need to use the keypad, I said. I raised my hands slowly. I am going to walk to the door. Don't hurt her. Move! Julian shoved Sarah forward. And no tricks, Arthur. If the alarm goes off again, I shoot. I walked to the steel door. My heart was pounding a rhythm against my ribs, but my mind was clear. I punched in the code. The light turned green. The door hissed open. After you, I said. Julian pushed Sarah inside. He followed her, keeping the gun trained on her back. I walked in last. We were inside the belly of the beast. We were walking down the long concrete hallway toward Unit 504. Julian thought he was walking toward his salvation. He thought he was minutes away from millions of dollars. He didn't know that Unit 504 was empty. He didn't know that Frank was hiding in the shadows. And he didn't know that the only thing waiting for him in that room was his own reflection. "Walk faster!" Julian yelled, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. We reached the door of Unit 504. "Open it," Julian commanded. He pressed the gun against Sarah's head. "Now!" I looked at him. I looked at the fear in my daughter's eyes, and then I looked at the camera lens in the corner of the ceiling, the one Frank had just disabled. "Okay, Julian," I said softly. "You want to see what's inside? I'll show you." I reached for the keypad. The keypad beeped. 1, 2, 3, 4. A simple code for a complex trap. The heavy steel door of Unit 504 began to roll up. The sound was deafening in the quiet hallway, a grinding mechanical roar that echoed off the concrete. Julian didn't wait for it to open fully. He shoved Sarah to the ground and ducked under the rising door. He scrambled inside like a starving animal lunging for meat. "The bonds!" he screamed. "Where are the bonds?" I helped Sarah to her feet. She was shaking, tears streaming down her face. I stood in front of her, shielding her with my body. We watched Julian. He was spinning in circles in the center of the room. There were no boxes of cash. There were no stacks of gold. There were no bearer bonds. Unit 504 was almost completely empty. In the center of the room sat a single small folding table. On top of it was a laptop connected to a projector, and on the wall, projected in high definition, was a video. It was the video Frank had taken 3 days ago. It showed Julian in the alleyway, on his knees, begging the loan shark Sergei for more time. "Please," the Julian on the screen sobbed. "I'll get the money. My father-in-law is senile. I'll steal his retirement. Just give me a week." The real Julian froze. He stared at the giant image of his own cowardice. The sound of his own desperate voice filled the small room. He turned around slowly. His face was pale, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. He looked at the empty corners. He looked at the projector. And then he looked at me. "What is this?" he whispered. "Where's the money?" I took a step forward. I didn't need my cane anymore. I stood up to my full height. I looked him dead in the eye, and for the first time in 3 years, I let him see the real Arthur Vance. "There is no money, Julian," I said. My voice was steady, deep, and cold. "There never was. The bonds were a lie. The memory loss was a lie. The only real thing in this room is the evidence." I pointed to the laptop. "That computer is currently uploading 3 years of audio recordings to the Seattle Police Department and the FBI, I said. "Recordings of you abusing my daughter. Recordings of you planning to commit fraud. Recordings of you admitting to illegal gambling debts. And this video? This video proves motive for extortion and kidnapping." Julian's mouth opened and closed. He looked like a man waking up from a dream into a nightmare. "You," he stammered. "You're not sick." "I was the chief engineer for the 747 program," I said. "I don't get sick. I get even." Julian's shock turned into pure, unadulterated rage. The realization hit him. He wasn't rich. He wasn't saved. He was finished. He raised the gun. He pointed it directly at my chest. "You old son of a," he screamed. "Fix it! Call them! Stop the upload! Or I swear to God I will kill you right here," Sarah screamed. "Dad!" "It's too late, Julian," I said calmly. "The upload is complete. And you can't shoot me." "Why not?" he yelled, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Why the hell not?" "Because," a deep voice said from the shadows behind him, because I don't miss. Julian spun around. Frank stepped out from behind a stack of empty boxes in the corner of the unit. He was holding a .45 caliber pistol, and it was aimed steadily at Julian's head. "Drop it, kid," Frank said. Julian froze. He looked at Frank. He looked at me. He looked at the gun in his hand. For a second, I thought he was going to do it. I thought he was going to shoot. He was desperate enough. He was crazy enough. But he was also a coward. We stood there for a heartbeat that felt like an hour. The only sound was the hum of the projector fan and Sarah's terrified breathing. "Drop the gun," Frank repeated, "or I drop you." Julian let out a sob, a pathetic, broken sound. His hand shook. Then slowly he opened his fingers. The gun clattered to the concrete floor. "On your knees!" Frank barked. Julian collapsed. He fell to his knees, putting his hands on his head. He started to cry. Not tears of remorse. Tears of self-pity. "It's not fair," he sobbed. "I just wanted a chance. I just wanted to be someone." I walked over and kicked the gun away. I stood over him. I looked down at the man who had tormented my daughter, who had made me pretend to be weak, who had threatened to kill us. "You were someone," I said. "You were my son-in-law. You were Sarah's husband. That should have been enough." Sirens began to wail in the distance. They were getting louder. "I told the police to hold back until the signal," Frank said, keeping his gun trained on Julian. "Protocol Omega is complete." I turned to Sarah. She was standing by the door, trembling. She looked at Julian, weeping on the floor. She looked at the video playing on the wall. She looked at me. I opened my arms. "Dad," she choked out. She ran to me. She buried her face in my shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. I held her tight. I held her like I used to when she was a little girl and the thunder was too loud. "I've got you," I whispered. "I've got you. It's over." The police burst into the facility a minute later. Men in tactical gear swarmed the hallway. They handcuffed Julian. They read him his rights. They dragged him away. He screamed as they took him. He screamed that I was a liar. He screamed that it was a setup, but nobody was listening. I watched him go. I felt a weight lift off my chest, a weight I had been carrying for 3 years. The structure had held. The trap had worked. The monster was in a cage. But as I looked at my daughter, still shaking in my arms, I knew the real work was just beginning. The building hadn't collapsed, but it was damaged, and rebuilding is always harder than demolition. The silence that follows a siren is the heaviest silence in the world. Julian was gone. The police cars had faded into the rainy Seattle night. Frank had left after giving me a firm handshake and a nod that said everything we didn't need to say out loud. I was alone in Unit 504 with my daughter. Sarah sat on one of the folding chairs I had set up for the police interview. She was wrapped in a shock blanket the paramedics had given her. She was staring at the blank wall where the video of Julian had been playing just an hour ago. I walked over and sat next to her. I didn't try to hug her yet. I knew she felt fragile, like glass that has been shattered and glued back together. "I feel so stupid," she whispered. Her voice was rough from crying. "How did I not see it, Dad? How did I let him do this to us?" "You're not stupid, Sarah," I said gently. "You were in love, and Julian was a master at what he did. He isolated you. He made you doubt your own reality. That is not love. That is engineering. He built a cage around you, bar by bar, so slowly you didn't notice until the door was locked." She looked at me. Her eyes were red and swollen. "You knew. The whole time, you knew." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the leather journal, the one I had carried with me for 3 years, the one filled with dates, times, and observations. "I suspected," I said, "but I needed proof. And more importantly, I needed you to see it for yourself." I
handed her the book. She took it with trembling hands. She opened it to the first page. May 12th. Julian makes Sarah apologize for laughing too loud. June 4th. Julian moves Sarah's keys to make her think she is forgetful. August 20th. Julian tells Sarah that her father is sick and cannot be trusted. Sarah read the entries. She ran her fingers over my handwriting. Fresh tears spilled onto the pages. "You wrote all this down," she said. "You watched me suffer and you wrote it down." "Why didn't you stop him sooner?" "Because if I had tried to pull you out before you were ready, you would have hated me," I said honestly. "You would have run back to him. I had to wait until the foundation of his lies cracked. I had to wait until you were ready to walk out the door yourself." She closed the book and held it to her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "I am an engineer," I said, putting my arm around her. "We don't abandon a project just because it has a few cracks. We rebuild." The next few months were not easy. Healing is not a straight line. It is a messy, painful process. Julian pleaded guilty. With the video evidence, the audio recordings, and Frank's testimony, he didn't have a choice. He was sentenced to 15 years for attempted kidnapping, extortion, and fraud. He will be an old man when he gets out. He will have plenty of time to think about the difference between net worth and self-worth. Sarah moved back in with me. For the first few weeks, she barely slept. She jumped at loud noises. She asked for permission to buy groceries. It broke my heart to see. But I was patient. I cooked her dinner. I listened when she wanted to talk, and I sat in silence with her when she didn't. Slowly, the light began to come back into her eyes. One morning over breakfast, about 6 months after the arrest, Sarah put down her coffee cup. "Dad," she said, "I want to paint again." Before Julian, Sarah had been an artist. She loved to paint large, colorful canvases. Julian had told her it was a waste of time and money. He had made her throw away her easels. "I think that is a wonderful idea," I said. "But I don't have a studio," she said, "and I don't want to paint in the house. I need a space that is mine, somewhere I can be messy and loud and free." I smiled. "I think I know a place." We drove downtown to the Iron Mountain facility. We walked past the security desk. We took the elevator to the 5th floor. We stood in front of Unit 504. Sarah looked at the door. She took a deep breath. This was the place where her marriage had ended. This was the place where she had almost lost her life. "Are you sure?" I asked. "Yes," she said. She punched in the code herself. The door rolled up. The room was exactly as we had left it. Empty, cold, concrete. "It has good lighting," Sarah said, stepping inside. She looked around, her eyes calculating, not fear, but possibility. "And it is quiet. I could work here." And that is exactly what she did. It has been 1 year since that night. If you go to Unit 504 now, you won't recognize it. The concrete walls are covered in colorful splatters of paint. There are canvases stacked in the corners. There is a smell of turpentine and lavender. It is no longer a trap. It is a sanctuary. Sarah is there right now, working on a new series. She calls it Reconstruction. It is beautiful. As for me, I am back in my garden on Mercer Island. The silence in the big house doesn't bother me anymore because I know it won't last. Sarah comes home for dinner every night. We talk, we laugh, we argue about politics. It is the best noise in the world. People ask me if I regret the way I handled things. They ask if I regret the lies, the fake bonds, the dangerous game I played with a desperate man. I tell them no. I learned a lot about structures in my 40 years at Boeing, but the most important lesson I learned was in that storage unit. There are 2 ways to hold on to something you love. You can grip it tight, like Julian did. You can try to control it, cage it, and own it.
But if you squeeze too hard, you will crush it. That is not love. That is possession. Or you can build a foundation. You can support it. You can stand back and let it grow, even if it grows away from you for a while. You can watch from the shadows, ready to catch it if it falls. That is what a father does. That is what love is. It isn't the walls that keep a house standing. It is the trust that the foundation will hold when the storm comes. My daughter is safe. My house is full. And my work here is done. Thank you for listening to my story. If you suspect someone you love is being controlled or abused, do not look away. Document it. Be patient. And when the time is right, be the solid ground they can land on. Take care of each other. And remember, the strongest lock in the world isn't made of steel. It is made of truth. Goodbye.